What's up, savvy expats? So today we're talking about 10 cultural differences between America and the Philippines. And this goes without saying, but this is a generalized list. So not all Filipinos and not all Americans do the things that we're about to talk about. And I'm speaking from personal experience, being that I was raised in the US but am currently living in the Philippines. Alright, enough talk, let's get into our list. So at number 1 on our list of cultural differences, we have quirks and expressions. Yes, the way that Filipinos express themselves versus Americans can differ in several ways. As many of you may already know, Filipinos tend to point with their lips like that, while Americans tend to point with their fingers. Oh hey, where's the CR? So that's a terrible example, but you get the idea. Or another one I learned here in the Philippines is that this hand wave means like wala, there's no more, or something's closed. So if you're asking a Filipino if there's any more food, for example, and they do this, that means that there's no more. And actually not too long ago, there was this little boy named Gab and his mom that lived with us. They were from the Visayas region of the Philippines, and they would actually, this is what they actually taught me, is this.
Good.
So usually when a Filipino raises his eyebrows, that means yes. Hey Gab, you want some Spam?
Yes, yeah.
Well, in America, there's 3 ways that you can say yes non-verbally. Number 1, you just nod. Number 2, just give a thumbs up. And 3, just do this, which means okay. And this is not really an expression, but say you're here in the Philippines and you're out on the street and it's hot outside. If you're waiting at a stopwalk to cross the street, it's pretty common to see Filipinos hiding behind like a sign or a pole to get away from the sun. So when it comes to avoiding the sun here in the Philippines, it can be pretty extreme. So in the US, umbrellas are only used for the rain, while here in the Philippines, it's used for both the rain and getting shade from the sun. And this is because being dark-skinned here in the Philippines is seen as like lower class or even like frowned upon here. And it's funny because while Filipinos are hiding from the sun to be as white as possible, Americans are out in the sun in the open to be tan. So being tan in the US is considered attractive, while in the Philippines it's the opposite. Now for cultural difference number 2, we have a use of words or slang. For example, here in the Philippines we say soft drinks, while in the US we say soda, or like what we like to call in the Midwest, pop. Or of course, Filipinos say aircon, while in the US we say AC or air conditioning. Or in the Philippines they say tissue, while in the US we say napkins. Or there was also this one time, I go to church here in BGC, it's called Every Nation, and one of my friends asked me, "Evan, do you want some alcohol?" And here am I thinking, alcohol? This is a Christian church, we're all teenagers here, why is he offering me some booze? And then he pulls out of his pocket some hand sanitizer, and I'm like, oh, that kind of alcohol. So that was actually the first time I heard hand sanitizer used as alcohol. Or another one is Filipinos say ref, while Americans say fridge or refrigerator. Or Filipinos say slippers, while Americans say flip-flops. Filipinos say brownout, Americans say blackout. Americans say sneakers, Filipinos say rubber shoes. Filipinos say CR or comfort room, Americans say restroom. Filipinos say open the light or close the light, Americans say turn on the light or turn off the light. Americans say pen, Filipinos say ball pen. Americans say McDonald's, Filipinos say McDo. Americans say butter, Filipinos say margarine. I think Americans say cracker, Filipinos say biscuit or biscuit. Alright, moving on to cultural difference number 3, Philippine culture is polite and sensitive. So the best words that I can muster up to describe how Filipinos interact with each other is polite, subtle, sensitive, and non-confrontational. Whereas in the US, people are more like assertive, direct, and confrontational. So in the Philippines, if someone spoke even the smallest hint of something negative about someone, that would speak volumes. While in the US, that would go unnoticed. And to take that even a step further, even insulting in the US can be a type of joking and bonding.
Yeah, I have an important announcement to make.
Joking around about people's new bad haircut or how bad they are at sports, that is pretty common in the US. And that's not to say that that is not the case with Filipinos. I mean, that's just pretty much a type of joking all over the world, but I see that more common in the US than it is here in the Philippines. And like I said, with Americans, they're more direct, blunt, and tend to not sugarcoat. If there's something bothering them or the food is taking long to get served, it's not uncommon to hear a waiter get an earful. So Americans usually say what's on their mind. While on the other hand, Filipinos are less confrontational. And I think part of it is because a lot of Filipinos are really polite. Like even when there's someone walking near or past you on the street, I noticed that Filipinos are kind of like dip down, put their hand down like that. I don't know how to show you guys in the small camera. And they do that, and I think that's a sign of respect, or just like a type of courtesy. Or even when it comes to daily conversing, there's a lot of can I have, please, sorry. And a lot of times that's not the case in the US. For example, if I were to say at a restaurant here in the Philippines, let me get a cheeseburger, that would not really be a common way to phrase things here in the Philippines. That would definitely be uncommon here. In the States, that kind of phrasing is normal.
Yo, boss, let me get 2 chopped cheese with everything on it. Put bacon on it too. Salt, pepper, and vinegar.
So again, this is a generalization. There are direct Filipinos out there and non-direct Americans. And for the fourth cultural difference, that is the pace of life. Americans are very fast-paced and tend to have a busy agenda. As for the Philippines, people are more chill, laid back, and slower paced. And so one thing I noticed is that people's normal walking pace here in the Philippines is actually a lot slower than the walking pace in the US. I remember walking in New York, everyone has somewhere to go, they're walking fast, and they have to be at their appointment early or on the dot. While here in the Philippines, it's common to see people upwards of an hour late to an event. Even when it comes to checking out or getting the bill or just transactions in general, people can be very slow. And it's even common to find employees in the grocery store just chatting in the middle of an aisle. While in the US, people are very weary about other people's time, so it's considered to be rude if you're late. So that's definitely one area where you see the island life in Filipinos. They're very chill and laid back. Moving on to cultural difference number 5, and that is sharing is very common in Philippine culture. Here in the Philippines, people are very generous and are willing to lend personal items. Whether it be clothes, an umbrella, a bike, Filipinos are generally willing to share. And also, it can be to the point where they feel obligated to lend their resources. And don't get me started when it comes to food. Filipinos are probably the most hospitable people when it comes to sharing food. Whether it be families or even strangers, Filipinos insist that you eat with them. And this is regardless of how much food they have or even their financial situation, they're always generous with their food. Even to the point where it's taken as an insult if you don't accept the offer to eat. I even remember there was this guy named Jeff here in BGC that would walk around and sell lumpia. And whenever I'd see him, he'd ask me if I ate, and if I hadn't, he'd offer me lumpia free of charge. And that's how generous Filipinos are. Now, as for Americans, it's not that they don't like sharing, it's just that an independent culture is more so promoted. It's a get your own food or do it yourself kind of mentality. Now, for cultural difference number 6, Americans are very adamant about personal space. In the US, physical boundaries are very strong, especially when it comes to strangers. So commonly, Americans have like a bubble, and the only time that bubble is broken is to shake hands. When conversing with strangers, there's space. When walking, there's space. Just wherever you go in general, people need their personal space. So that's why there's very seldom bumping or brushing up against someone else. Whereas here in the Philippines, there's all this room on the sidewalk, and yet still another person will walk literally right beside you. Or when getting off the escalator, someone will stand right in front of it while blocking everyone else. There was this one time where I was just standing on the sidewalk where there's practically nobody else nearby me. It's a big sidewalk, and this lady walks right beside me, pretty much almost bumps into me, and then tells me to social distance. So spatial boundaries in the Philippines is really just different. Filipinos like to be close together while Americans need their personal space. Now, for cultural difference number 7, we have Filipinos have respect for their elders. In the Philippines, older brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents are addressed with respect. Even if it's with strangers, Filipinos will address others as ate or kuya as a sign of respect. Same goes with family. Tita, tito, lolo, lola, it's all respect. And not to mention, Filipinos do mano, which is like putting your grandparents' forehand on your head to show respect when you're greeting them. And so basically anyone that's older than you is treated with that kind of respect. Now in America we say Mr. and Mrs., but nowadays that's not always the case. Now as for cultural difference number 8, that is rules are often not followed here in the Philippines. I remember this one time here in the Philippines we saw a sign that went along the lines of no peeing here, and then you see all these little pee marks on the side of the wall. It's pretty funny. But even when it comes to enforcing laws, most people don't follow them anyway. For example, littering is common and road rules are often not followed. Or if the police pull someone over for disobeying traffic laws, at the same time you have hundreds of other cars doing the same. So they only get one out of hundreds of people doing the same exact thing. While in America, laws are strictly enforced. For example, there's a line, you're expected to get in line and wait your turn. While here in the Philippines, either there is no line or someone cuts in line and no one cares. But again, this isn't everyone in the Philippines. Now for cultural difference number 9, we have Filipino meal structure. The time and the amount of meals that Filipinos tend to eat is different than the US. It's fairly common to see Filipinos eat 5 to even 6 meals a day because of what's called a merienda, which is basically like a snack. So I believe the structure of meals go breakfast, merienda, lunch, merienda, dinner, late night merienda. And merienda can be anything from coffee and crackers to pandesal to puto and conchinta. But the way I see it, Filipinos may eat several times per day, but it's still probably equivalent to the amount the average American eats per day. Americans usually eat 3 square meals per day, but usually those 3 square meals are larger serving sizes. So by the end of the day, the 6 meals that a Filipino eats is probably equivalent to the 3 meals that an American eats. But of course, again, it varies from person to person. And for the last and final cultural difference, we have tipping. Tipping is a big part of American culture. In almost every situation where someone is of service, a waiter, hairdresser, cab driver, bartender, you name it, they get tipped. With Americans, there's no mandatory amount for tipping, but it's considered rude to not tip at all. Most Americans tip like 15 to 20% of their bill. What I found here in the Philippines is that tipping is still existent, but it's definitely less common. I remember telling my driver that in the US, it's normal to tip 10 or 500 pesos to a waiter, and he was absolutely shocked. He couldn't believe that that was the tip and that wasn't the price for the entire meal. But it makes sense because, I mean, the financial situation of both countries is different, so what do you expect? So there you have it, savvy expats. 10 cultural differences between America and the Philippines. And everything I said was not intended to bash. I love both America and the Philippines. I don't know why, but there's always one person in the comments that thinks I'm bashing the Philippines. But that was my honest experience living here in the Philippines, and I'd rather give you guys my honesty rather than portray everything as sunshine and rainbows. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a like. And so thank you for watching, Savvy Expats, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless.